Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't confrontation or revenge. It's simply walking away and never looking back. My name is Evan, and this is how I discovered my wife's affair, disappeared without a word, and 3 years later, she never expected what I told her. I met Naomi after we both graduated from college and started dating seriously within a few months. We were both in our 20s, fresh out of school with degrees in hand and optimistic about building our futures. I'd studied communications and landed an entry-level marketing coordinator position at a mid-sized company in Denver. Naomi had majored in finance and secured a financial analyst role at a major investment firm with clear advancement potential. From the beginning, there was an income disparity between us, but it never felt like an issue during those early years. We were both young professionals starting out, both excited about our careers and our relationship. By the time we'd been together for 2 years, marriage felt like the next step. We were spending most nights together anyway, had met each other's families, and were making plans that extended years into the future. We got married in a simple ceremony with close friends and family. Those first few years of marriage were characterized by building a life from almost nothing. We rented a 1-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood, splitting the $1,300 monthly rent evenly. We divided all our bills proportionally based on income, which meant Naomi contributed more to shared expenses, but I always paid my fair share. We saved aggressively for a down payment on our first home, putting away whatever we could spare each month. The income difference didn't create tension because we were both working hard and contributing to our shared goals. Naomi's higher salary meant we could save faster and afford a slightly nicer lifestyle, but I never felt like I was being supported or that my contributions didn't matter. We were partners building something together, and that partnership felt genuine and balanced. Within those first 5 years of marriage, my career trajectory didn't progress as quickly as Naomi's did. While she was promoted twice at her firm, moving from analyst to senior analyst, and seeing her salary climb, I remained in mid-level marketing roles, earning around half her salary. I wasn't unhappy with my work, but I also felt somewhat stuck in corporate structures that limited creativity and entrepreneurial thinking. After our 5th marriage anniversary, I made a decision that would significantly impact our financial dynamic. I decided to leave my corporate marketing job and pursue freelance digital marketing work. I'd been developing skills in SEO, content strategy, and social media management, and I believed I could build a sustainable business helping small companies with their online presence. Naomi was supportive of this transition, at least outwardly. We discussed the financial implications. My income would be unpredictable initially, meaning she'd carry more of our household expenses while I built my client base. She said she believed in my abilities and was willing to support this career change if it meant I'd be happier and have more long-term potential. The reality of freelancing was harder than I'd anticipated. Building a client base took time, and my income for the first year was sporadic and significantly lower than my previous corporate salary. Some months, I'd land good contracts and bring in decent money. Other months, I'd struggle to find work and contribute almost nothing to our household finances. During this period, Naomi's career continued advancing. She was promoted to investment analyst. The income gap between us, which had always existed but felt manageable, became more pronounced. I won't pretend this dynamic didn't create some internal pressure for me. I felt like I should be contributing more financially, like my decision to pursue entrepreneurship was putting an unfair burden on Naomi. But whenever I expressed these concerns, she'd reassure me that she believed in what I was building, that the financial imbalance was temporary, and that we were still partners regardless of who earned what. Looking back, I realized that Naomi's reassurances during this period were probably masking the growing resentment she wasn't expressing directly. Maybe she did feel burdened by carrying most of our financial weight. Maybe she resented that I'd chosen a career path that made me dependent on her income. Maybe the income disparity started making her see me differently, less as a partner and more as someone she was supporting. Whatever was happening internally for Naomi, The external changes in our relationship became noticeable around the 7th year of our marriage. She started working increasingly late hours, often not getting home until 8 or 9 p.m., when her office officially closed at 6. When I'd ask about the late nights, she'd explain that she was working toward another promotion, that face time at the office mattered in her industry, and that she needed to prove her dedication to advance further. The explanation seemed reasonable on the surface. I knew investment firms had demanding cultures, and Naomi was ambitious about her career. But the frequency of late nights kept increasing, from once or twice a week to 3 or 4 times weekly, sometimes staying at the office until 10 or 11 p.m. On weekends, she'd often go into the office for a few hours, claiming she needed to prepare for Monday meetings or finish reports. Even when Naomi was physically home, she wasn't really present. She developed an obsession with her phone that I'd never seen before. She'd be scrolling constantly, checking messages even during dinner, taking her phone with her to the bathroom, sleeping with it on her nightstand instead of charging it in another room like she used to. When I tried to have conversations, her responses became increasingly superficial and distracted. Our emotional intimacy, which had always been a strong foundation of our relationship, eroded dramatically. We'd gone from deep conversations about our dreams, fears, and daily experiences to surface-level exchanges about logistics and schedules. We stopped having meaningful discussions about anything beyond bills and household management. The connection that had made me want to marry her in the first place seemed to be disappearing. About 6 months into this pattern, I finally confronted Naomi directly about what was happening. I told her I felt like we were becoming strangers living in the same house, that I barely saw her anymore, and that even when we were together, she seemed distant and disconnected. I asked if something was wrong, if I'd done something to upset her, if she was unhappy in our marriage. Naomi's response was immediate defensiveness. She said I wasn't being understanding, that I didn't understand the pressures of her career, that she'd worked incredibly hard to get where she was and couldn't just coast. She claimed she was focused on securing a director-level promotion that would significantly increase our household income and provide long-term financial security. She made it sound like her late hours and distance were sacrifices she was making for our future together. I wanted to believe her explanation. I wanted to think that this was just a challenging phase in her career that would pass once she achieved the promotion she was working toward. But something about her defensiveness felt off, like she was deflecting rather than actually addressing my concerns about our emotional disconnect. After that conversation, I tried to be more understanding about Naomi's schedule and focus. I stopped commenting when she came home late or spent entire weekends at the office. I tried not to take it personally when she'd barely look up from her phone during dinner. I wanted to believe that this was temporary, but the distance only grew. Naomi started treating me more like a roommate than a husband. We stopped having physical intimacy beyond occasional perfunctory encounters that felt more like obligation than desire. We were existing in parallel rather than building a shared life. I started feeling like I was living with a stranger who happened to share my last name and living space. The woman I'd married to had been replaced by someone cold, distracted, and seemingly uninterested in our relationship. I found myself questioning whether she still loved me, whether she regretted marrying someone who wasn't as financially successful as she was, whether our marriage was essentially over, but neither of us wanted to admit it. The discovery that changed everything happened on a Thursday evening, over many months into Naomi's pattern of late nights and emotional distance. She came home around 10:30 p.m., which had become fairly normal. What was also normal was her routine of heading straight to the shower immediately upon arriving home, not even really greeting me beyond a brief acknowledgement. I came into our bedroom when Naomi went to shower, and that's when I noticed her phone glowing on the dresser. She'd left it there rather than taking it into the bathroom with her, which was unusual given how attached she'd become to the device. The screen was lit up with notifications, several text messages that had come through while she was in the shower. Curiosity pulled me toward the dresser. I knew I was about to violate her privacy by looking at her phone, but something stronger than respect for boundaries was driving me. the need to know what was really happening in my marriage. I looked down at the lock screen and saw several notification previews. The messages were from a contact, saved as just a first name. The previews showed only portions of the messages because the phone was locked, but what I could read was devastating. One message said something about how amazing she looked today, asking her to keep dressing this way. Another referenced how she was wet from the get-go. A third message was more explicit, mentioning how much he'd enjoyed their time and didn't know how much time had flown by. I stood there frozen, reading and rereading these notification previews, my mind trying to process what was obvious, but what I desperately didn't want to believe. Naomi was having an affair. The late nights, the phone obsession, the emotional distance, the defensiveness. It all suddenly made perfect sense. She wasn't working late. She was seeing someone else. She was building a relationship that had nothing to do with our marriage. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my own phone and photographed Naomi's lock screen, showing these notifications. I knew I needed evidence, something concrete that proved what I discovered wasn't my imagination or misinterpretation. The photo captured several message previews from the affair partner, time-stamped and clearly visible. I heard the shower turn off and quickly moved away from the dresser, my heart pounding. Naomi emerged from the bathroom, grabbed her phone without really looking at me, and got into bed. She was asleep within minutes, while I lay there in the dark, my mind racing through implications and decisions. I didn't confront her that night. In fact, I never confronted her at all about what I discovered. Some part of me understood immediately that confrontation wouldn't give me what I needed. Naomi would probably deny, minimize, make excuses, or turn around on me. We'd have a terrible fight that would end with me either accepting to work on the marriage or filing for divorce, and either outcome required staying engaged with someone who'd already shown me how little I mattered to her. Instead, I started planning my exit that very night. I lay awake thinking through what I needed to do to leave not just the marriage, but the entire life we'd built together in Denver. I realized that most of my work was online anyway, that I could take my freelance digital marketing business anywhere, that I wasn't tied to this location or this life beyond the relationship I was ready to end. Over the next couple of days, I moved through our home and daily routine like I was operating on autopilot. I maintained normal surface interactions with Naomi, but internally I was completely detached, already gone from a marriage, even though I was still physically present. During that week, I quietly made preparations. I transferred money from our joint account into a personal account I opened, leaving enough to cover the month's bills, but taking my fair share of our savings. I reached out to my few steady clients and explained I was relocating and would continue working with them remotely. I researched areas far from Denver where I could disappear and start over. I also started liquidating my share of things that tied me to our life together. The entire week, Naomi barely seemed to notice anything different. She came home late most nights, spent minimal time interacting with me, and seemed relieved that I wasn't pushing for more attention or conversation. Her focus was clearly elsewhere, probably on her lover and whatever fantasy life she was building with him. On the following Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after discovering the affair, I waited for Naomi to leave for work as usual. She left around 7:30 a.m. The moment her car pulled out of our apartment complex, I moved into action. I packed 2 large suitcases with clothes, toiletries, and personal items that mattered to me. I packed my laptop, external hard drives with work files, and professional equipment. I took photographs and mementos that were mine or that I'd want to keep. Everything else I left behind. They were just things, and I was traveling light toward a new life. Before leaving, I went to our small printer and printed the photo I'd taken of Naomi's phone notifications showing her affair partner's messages. I placed this single sheet of paper on the kitchen counter, where Naomi would see it immediately when she got home. No note, no explanation, just the evidence of what I'd discovered and why I was gone. I went to the bank and withdrew a significant amount of cash from our joint account, about $15,000, which was roughly half our combined savings. I knew this would trigger alerts on Naomi's phone, but I didn't care. By the time she noticed, I'd already be gone. I used the remainder of what I considered my fair share to buy physical gold. The final step before leaving was cutting off all means of contact. I blocked Naomi's number on my phone. I blocked her on all social media platforms. I sent brief messages to my parents and brother saying I was okay but needed space and would contact them when I was ready. I wasn't angry with them, but I knew Naomi would use them to try to find me. I drove to a public parking lot and threw my SIM card into a dumpster. I'd already purchased a new phone with cash under a new number that Naomi didn't know. I closed down my social media accounts entirely rather than just blocking people. I changed my primary email address and set my old business email to an autoresponder saying I was taking a sabbatical. By midday Thursday, I was driving east out of Denver with no specific destination beyond far away. I eventually ended up in rural Missouri, where I found a small cabin for rent outside a town of about 3,000 people. The cabin was basic but had internet access, which was all I needed for my work. The rent was cheap, the landlord asked few questions, and the location was remote enough that I could truly disappear. I had no idea what Naomi did when she got home that evening and found the printed photo on the counter, found me gone with my belongings, and found the bank account depleted. I'd blocked her completely, so I never received whatever messages or calls she attempted. I told no one where I was going, so she couldn't use mutual friends or family to locate me. For all I knew, Naomi might have been relieved that I'd left, making her affair with her lover easier to pursue openly. Or she might have panicked and tried desperately to find me. Or she might have been angry about the money I'd withdrawn and my disappearance without confrontation. I'd never know her initial reaction, and I realized I didn't actually want to know. Her response didn't matter anymore, because I was done being part of her life. The first few months in Missouri were focused entirely on rebuilding. I had to establish new routines, develop local connections for basic needs, and stabilize my freelance business now that I was working entirely remotely from a location where I knew no one. The work was actually therapeutic. It gave me structure and purpose during a time when I might otherwise have spent too much energy processing heartbreak. Mentally, I went through stages that I recognized as grief, even though I'd been the one to leave. I grieved the marriage I'd thought I had, the partner I'd believed Naomi was, the future we'd been building together. I felt anger at her betrayal and at myself for missing signs that were probably obvious in hindsight. I felt relief at escaping a relationship that had become hollow and dishonest. But somewhere around month 4 or 5, I experienced a fundamental shift. I moved from feeling heartbroken about what had ended to feeling done with the entire situation. The woman who cheated on me while I was working to build our life together no longer mattered to my present or future. The marriage that had dissolved wasn't something I wanted to resurrect or even understand better. I was simply finished with that chapter of my life. This mental shift from heartbroken to done was liberating. I stopped wondering what Naomi was doing or whether she regretted losing me. I stopped imagining scenarios where we might have worked things out if I'd handled discovery differently. I stopped feeling like a victim of her choices and started feeling like someone who'd made a strong choice to walk away from what wasn't serving me. My freelance business actually grew significantly during this period. Without the distraction of a failing marriage, and with complete focus on work, I was able to take on more clients, deliver better results, and build strong professional relationships. Within a year of leaving Denver, I was earning more than I ever had before, not Naomi's 6-figure salary, but a solid income that supported my simple lifestyle comfortably. I also discovered that I genuinely enjoyed the solitude and simplicity of my new life. The cabin in rural Missouri offered peace I hadn't experienced in years. I'd wake up to quiet mornings, work at my own pace, take walks through woods behind the property, and spend evenings reading or watching movies without the tension that had characterized my final years with Naomi. I wasn't lonely, I was content. Over the 3+ years following my disappearance, I occasionally wondered if Naomi had tried to find me. I assumed she probably had, at least initially. She'd want to understand why I'd left without confrontation, might want to offer explanations or apologies, and would certainly want to finalize legal issues around our marriage and finances. But I'd made myself essentially unfindable by cutting all digital traces and telling no one where I'd gone. I also wondered sometimes if she'd moved on completely, if her affair partner had become her new partner, if she'd simply replaced me and continued her life in Denver without looking back. Part of me hoped that was the case, that she'd found whatever she'd been seeking when she chose to have an affair, and that my exit had freed both of us from a marriage that wasn't working. But mostly, I didn't think about Naomi or our ended marriage at all. I was building a new life that had nothing to do with who I'd been during those years in Denver. I was becoming someone different, more independent, more self-assured, more clear about what I wanted and didn't want in relationships and life generally. The knock on my cabin door came on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 years and 1 month after I'd left Denver. I wasn't expecting anyone. I rarely had visitors beyond the occasional delivery driver or the landlord checking on property maintenance. I opened the door and froze completely. Naomi was standing on my porch. She looked different from when I'd last seen her 3 years ago. Her hair was shorter, styled differently. She was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater rather than the professional attire I'd always associated with her. We stared at each other for several seconds without speaking. I was processing the shock of seeing her after years of complete separation, trying to understand how she'd found me when I'd been so careful about disappearing. She looked uncertain, like she wasn't sure I'd even recognize her or acknowledge her presence. Finally, Naomi spoke. She said she'd been trying to find me for a long time, that it had taken hiring multiple private investigators before one finally tracked me down through some digital footprint I'd apparently left despite my precautions. She said she'd driven straight from Denver when she got the address, that she needed to talk to me, that there were things she needed to say. I stood in the doorway, not saying anything, torn between the impulse to close the door in her face and curiosity about what could possibly have motivated her to spend years and apparently significant money tracking down someone who'd made it clear he was done. A part of me wanted to tell her to leave, that showing up uninvited at my home after 3 years was inappropriate and unwelcome. But another part of me recognized that this unexpected visit might actually provide the closure I hadn't realized I needed. For 3 years, I'd lived with questions about how things ended, what Naomi thought when she found me gone, whether she'd felt any remorse, what stories she told herself about why our marriage failed. Maybe letting her say whatever she'd come to say would finally close that chapter completely. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and gestured for Naomi to come inside. She entered hesitantly, looking around the small cabin that was now my home. I could see her processing the contrast with the apartment we'd shared in Denver. This place was much smaller, simpler, more isolated. She looked confused about why I'd chosen this life after leaving her. We sat down in my small living area, me in the chair and Naomi on the couch, maintaining physical distance. Naomi looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, like she knew this conversation might not go the way she wanted, but felt compelled to try anyway. She started by saying she'd been in therapy for the past 2 years. She said her therapist had helped her understand things about herself, about our marriage, about why she'd made the choices that drove me away. She claimed she'd done significant personal work, that she wasn't the same person who'd had an affair and taken me for granted. Naomi said she regretted everything that had happened, that she understood now how badly she'd hurt me and how little she'd valued what we had together. She said she still loved me, that she'd never stopped loving me, even when she was making terrible choices. She said she wanted to talk about whether we could work things out, whether there might be a path forward together. I listened to this speech without expression, watching Naomi cry as she delivered what was clearly something she'd rehearsed many times. When she finished talking and looked at me expectantly, I let the silence stretch for a moment before responding. I asked her to explain exactly what happened after I left, what her life had been like for the past 3 years. Not because I particularly cared, but because I wanted to hear her tell the story, wanted to know if she'd acknowledge the full truth of her choices. Naomi took a shaky breath and started explaining. She said that when she came home that Thursday evening and found the printed photo on the counter, found me and my belongings gone, found the bank account depleted, she'd panicked completely. She tried calling and texting me repeatedly before realizing I'd blocked her. She'd contacted my family and friends trying to find me, but I'd apparently told everyone I needed space and hadn't shared my location. She admitted that in her panic and anger, she'd done something incredibly stupid. She'd filed for divorce. She said she was furious that I'd left without confrontation, that I'd taken money from our account, that I'd disappeared, making it impossible for her to explain or apologize. So she'd hired a lawyer and filed divorce papers, which were served through publication since my whereabouts were unknown. The divorce went through uncontested since I never responded to the papers I never received. Our marriage was legally dissolved about 6 months after I left. Naomi said at the time, she told herself this was fine, that we were clearly over anyway, that she could move forward with her lover without the complication of still being married. But the relationship with the lover fell apart quickly once it was no longer a secret affair. Naomi said that what had felt exciting and passionate when it was forbidden became ordinary and disappointing when it was her actual relationship. Her affair partner, it turned out, was married himself and had never intended to leave his wife. When Naomi pushed for a real relationship after our divorce, he ended things entirely. Naomi described the year following our divorce as the worst of her life. She'd lost her marriage, lost the affair that had seemed so important, and found herself completely alone, dealing with the reality of her choices. She said she'd achieved the promotion she'd been working toward, but it felt empty without anyone to share it with. She said she tried dating, but couldn't connect with anyone because she was still processing what had happened with us. By the end of that first year, Naomi said she realized she'd destroyed something irreplaceable when she chose to have an affair rather than work on our marriage. She said she understood too late that my worth had nothing to do with income, that I'd been a devoted partner who'd supported her ambitions even when my own career was struggling, that I'd loved her without condition while she'd taken that love for granted. She said she'd started therapy, trying to understand why she'd sabotaged a good relationship, why income disparity had made her resentful rather than grateful, and why she'd sought validation from an affair rather than addressing problems directly. She claimed the work had been painful but necessary, that she'd confronted ugly truths about her values and priorities. Naomi said that over the past 2 years, finding me had become almost an obsession. She'd hired 3 different private investigators before one finally tracked me down. She'd spent thousands of dollars on this search. She said she needed to tell me all of this, needed to apologize properly, needed to know if there was any possibility I could forgive her and consider trying again. She looked at me with tears streaming down her face, clearly hoping for some sign that her story had moved me, that her regrets and therapy and efforts to find me meant something. She asked directly if I could ever forgive her, if we might have another chance together. I looked at Naomi calmly, feeling nothing but clarity about what needed to be said. I told Naomi that she was making a fundamental mistake in how she understood what happened to our marriage. I said she seemed to think she lost me when I discovered the affair and left, that the betrayal was the moment everything fell apart. But that wasn't accurate at all. I explained that she didn't lose me when she cheated. She lost me when I realized I was begging someone to value me. She lost me during all those months when I was trying to connect with her and she was pulling away. She lost me every time I asked what was wrong, and she dismissed my concerns. She lost me when I found myself grateful for scraps of attention from my own wife. She lost me gradually, long before I found those text messages on her phone. The affair, I told her, wasn't what destroyed our marriage. It was just a confirmation of what I'd already known, that I didn't matter to her anymore, that she checked out of our partnership, that I was putting all my energy into a relationship where I was barely even considered. I said that discovering the affair had actually freed me from the torture of wondering what I was doing wrong, why my wife had become a stranger, and whether I was just being paranoid about her distance. The affair permitted me to stop trying, to stop begging for basic consideration from someone who'd already decided I wasn't enough. Naomi started crying harder, but I continued because she needed to hear this truth. I told her that her therapy and regrets and efforts to find me were about her own guilt and loneliness, not about valuing me. She'd lost her affair partner, achieved her promotion, and found herself alone with the reality of her choices. Now she wanted me back, not because she'd realized my actual worth, but because she'd realized that having someone devoted to her, even if they earned less, was better than being alone. I said that if our income situations had been reversed, if I'd been the one earning 6 figures while she struggled with freelance work, she probably never would have had an affair or lost respect for me. But because I earned less, because I'd chosen entrepreneurship that didn't immediately pay off, because I was the one financially dependent during a tough period, I became someone she could discard. I told Naomi that her showing up 3 years later to ask for another chance proved she still didn't understand the fundamental problem. Real love doesn't require someone to prove their worth through income. Real partnership doesn't mean carrying resentment about financial contributions while pretending everything is fine. Real commitment means working through difficulties together rather than seeking validation elsewhere when things get hard. Naomi was sobbing now, probably understanding for the first time that I wasn't someone she could convince or win back, that the person she'd been married to no longer existed. The man who'd loved her enough to ignore red flags and accept crumbs of affection was gone, replaced by someone who knew exactly what he deserved and wouldn't accept less. I stood up, indicating that this conversation was over. I thanked Naomi for coming, for providing the closure I hadn't known I needed. I said I hoped she found whatever she was looking for, but it wouldn't be with me. I asked her to leave. Naomi stood slowly, looking at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. She started to say something, then seemed to realize there were no words left that would change anything. She walked to the door, turned back once as if to memorize my face, and then left. I watched through the window as she got into her car and drove away down the dirt road leading from my cabin. I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, no triumph. I just felt finished. The chapter that had ended abruptly 3 years ago when I left Denver had now properly closed with this final conversation. I sat down in my chair and reflected on what had just happened. Naomi had spent years and thousands of dollars trying to find me, driven by guilt and regret and loneliness. She'd rehearsed apologies and explanations, built a narrative about personal growth and changed priorities, and hoped that her efforts would prove she'd learned and deserved another chance. But all of that was about her feelings, her regrets, her loneliness, her desires. None of it was actually about me or about understanding what I'd experienced during those final months of our marriage when I was fighting for connection with someone who'd already mentally left. I realized that my disappearance hadn't been about punishing Naomi or making her suffer. It had been about choosing peace over prolonged pain, about refusing to participate in the slow death of being devalued, about understanding that my worth wasn't up for negotiation. Leaving without confrontation wasn't weakness. It was recognizing that no conversation would change someone who'd already decided I wasn't enough. Naomi had found me 3 years too late. Not because I'd hidden particularly well, or because the private investigator had taken that long to track me down. She'd found me too late because I'd stopped waiting to be found, stopped hoping she'd realize my value, stopped defining myself by whether she chose to love me. The man she'd been married to would have been devastated by her affair and desperate for her to choose him. The man I'd become understood that real love doesn't require you to beg for basic consideration, and that walking away from someone who can't see your worth isn't giving up. It's finally choosing yourself. Sometimes disappearing isn't about running away. It's about running toward the life you deserve, away from people who've shown they don't value what you offer. It's about understanding that closure doesn't require confrontation, that healing doesn't require forgiveness, that moving forward doesn't require understanding why someone betrayed you. Naomi showed up thinking the story was about her making a mistake and seeking redemption. But it was actually about me learning that I deserve someone who never makes me feel like I need to earn their love, who values partnership over income, who chooses me clearly and consistently rather than resentfully and conditionally. I'm still in my cabin in Missouri, still running my digital marketing business, still living the quiet, peaceful life I built after leaving Denver. I don't wonder anymore about what Naomi is doing or whether she's found what she was looking for. Her life and choices are no longer relevant to mine. The story has ended, and I'm content with how it concluded, not with dramatic confrontation or attempts at reconciliation, but with simple clarity about what was real and what matters. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to someone who broke your trust is simply that you've moved on without them, and you're better for it. That's enough.